me the signal? Who will give me the signal? Welcome. I'm Gail Sasnett, Associate Director of the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, and we're so glad to have you here tonight. We're very privileged to have Professor Christopher Parker with us tonight. Dr. Parker received his PhD from the University of Chicago in 2001 and is the Scheingold Professor of Social Science and Political Science at the University of Washington. The bulk of his research takes a behavioral approach to historical events. Dr. Parker is widely published with his forthcoming book with Matt Barreto, The Great White Hope, Donald Trump, Race, and the Crisis of American Politics, from the University of Chicago Press. After the talk, there will be time for Q&A, as we normally do, and we will ask you to come to the microphone, as usual, because we are streaming. Remind you to please turn off your cell phones. And now, Dr. Parker.
Wow. Thank you very much. Well, it's kind of weird to hear my voice over speakers, but I'll try to maintain. So it's good to be here. And one of the reasons why I was so eager to come is because my buddy Dan O'Neill, Professor Dan O'Neill, was, Dan, I'm going to out you on this. Dan was one of my TAs in graduate school. Actually, undergrad. One of my favorite TA in graduate school. When he was a grad student, I was an undergrad for Poli-Sci 10, if I'm not mistaken, in Victor Wolfenstein's class. So really, you know, yep. Yeah. You're old. I'm old too. Okay, so thank you for coming out. And so I'm just going to get started with this, if you guys don't mind. So this book is a follow-on for the book that Matt and I did on the Tea Party called Change They Can't Believe In, the Tea Party Politics in the United States. And so that book was published in 2013. It's available on Amazon Press for all you guys out there in C-SPAN land. So, and what we did in that book, we wanted to examine the extent to which the Tea Party were who they said they were. And so the Tea Party claimed to be, all about small government. And I'm going to try to keep this clean. Last time I was on C-SPAN, I couldn't quite keep it clean. I'm going to really try. So instead of saying like bullshit, I'll say bull dookie or something like that. So we wanted to call bull dookie on the Tea Party. And that's exactly what we did. And we did so in a very social scientific way. So we're social scientists, so we do a lot of survey research, but we also do quantitative methodological approaches as well, because we want to try to triangulate as best we could. And what we found is that, yes, there were some people in the Tea Party that were all about small government. People on the left were talking about they were about racism, but it wasn't completely either one of those. It was this sort of reactionary impulse. And this reactionary impulse we traced all the way back to the Know Nothing Party of the 1850s, the Klan of the 1920s, the John Birch Society of the 1950s and 1960s, all the way clear through to the Tea Party. And the one thing that these things all had in common, we call these reactionary movements, what they all had in common was this aversion to rapid social change. So in the case of the Know Nothing Party, if you will, it was about rapidly immigrating folks from countries in which Catholicism was a dominant religion. In the 1920s, it was about the return to the quote-unquote new Negro to the United States after World War I. It was also about Catholic immigrants. It was also about this perception of Jews having dominance over capital, and also the increasing sexual freedom of women. And when it came to the John Birch Society in the 1960s, it was more about the civil rights movement, right? And with the Tea Party, it was about Obama and him getting elected and everything that represented. Now, in each one of the cases, it was a case of rapid social change. So that's what that book was about. And so what we did in this book, we're looking at Trump supporters because we argue in this book that the main reason why, or one of the principal reasons why Trump was elected was because these Tea Partiers got mobilized to support him. Initially, they were behind Ted Cruz, but Ted Cruz wasn't saying everything that Tea Party supporters wanted to hear, and Trump came the closest. And what we showed in that book, and one of the things that we wanted to do in that book, we wanted to show that there was a difference between these more establishment conservatives, right, and these more reactionary types. And the difference between these two groups is an establishment conservative, they don't necessarily want social change, but they're willing to deal with it. They're willing to tolerate it so long as society remains stable. Now, a reactionary, they don't want change at all. Actually, they want to go backwards in time, right? They want their group to maintain its social prestige. And so that's one of the things we want to do in that book is to say, hey, look, there's a real difference in these camps when it comes to conservatives, right? There's this more establishment type, we think more or less Reagan, Bob Dole, and you have these more reactionary types, Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin, and now Donald Trump. And so, but what's different about this book, in the first book, what we did was we just looked at white people. In this book, we're looking at white folks who are primarily Trump supporters and also people of color. So we're capturing this dynamic. So in the first book, I was the first author, so I got a whole bunch of the flack. So this time, Matt's the first author. So you guys out there in TV land or wherever you guys are, if you guys want to get after somebody, go after the brown man. Don't come after the black man. Matt's Latino. That's brown. All right. So the Great White Hope. All right. So linking Trump to reactionary movements of the past, we argue that the outcome of the 2016 election is an extension of a long process that began with the Know-Nothing Party of the 19th century. We demonstrate that economic anxiety and attitudes about global trade deals, the prior conventional wisdom, had virtually nothing to do with motivating his core voters. Now, that is one thing that we really want to dispel, because a lot of people think that, it's about economic anxiety and working class whites. Bull dookie. Show that empirically, right? This is not something that we're just pulling out of a hat. We show this empirically. And it flies in the face of a lot of the conventional wisdom, including some of our colleagues like Arlie Hochschild, who's at Berkeley, who wrote a book called Strangers in Their Own Land. Catherine Kramer, who's at the University of Wisconsin, who wrote a book called The Politics of Resentment. And how can I forget J.D. Vance? Okay, how can I forget him, right? So it's not to say that economic anxiety has completely nothing to do with it, but here's the thing. So how can we account for about 40% of college-educated whites voting for Trump? I don't think you can convince anybody that these people are economically anxious, right? That is to say, in the same way working class whites are supposed to be. So that's one of the rumors, or that's one of the conventional wisdoms or conventions that we want to dispel, because it is totally not true. Instead, we argue that Trump's rise, like the formation of other reactionary movements, was fueled by a sense of existential threat, the belief that real American culture is under siege. This is siege mentality. Real Americans, the America that they've come, real Americans, and I'm going to put air quotes, real Americans, the America that they've come to know and love is changing too fast and it's going away, right? And they will do anything to retain that. So, and when I gave this talk at Bates College on the Tea Party book several years ago, Bates College is in Maine, and I didn't realize there were so many Tea Party people in Maine. I had no idea. So it was an audience of about 200, and at least 20 of them were Tea Partiers. And if you don't believe me, you can go online and watch it on C-SPAN. You will see it, right? And somebody said, one guy said, well, only real Americans should be allowed to vote. We're talking, what, Native Americans? Like, who are we talking about here, man? Right? Who we talk? What is a real American? Right? He didn't really want to answer that question. From the Tea Party to Trump, the Tea Party did not espouse mainstream conservative principles, but rather was motivated by a sense of existential threat. Once again, when we say threat is existential, we don't mean in a material way, right? Because then how can one explain so many college-educated whites voting for Trump? How many college-educated whites who supported the Tea Party? This is not about material threat. This is more about a symbolic threat that their culture is changing too fast for their liking. It is now well established that Tea Party sympathizers were motivated by their threat to their status in a changing America and what Obama represented, right? Think about what the President of the United States represents. And the President of the United States is a commander-in-chief, chief law enforcement officer, the face of the country abroad, the head of government at home, right? It has immense symbolic importance. And so what we argue is that was just too much, and I'm just going to go here, that was just too much for some white folks to take. That was too much for these Tea Partiers, too much for many of these Trump supporters. Now, I'm not making a categorical assertion that all Trump supporters are racist or sexist or homophobic or xenophobic, but I will say, probabilistically, yeah, they are. I'm glad I'm in Gainesville doing this. All right. We think that's the argument, and we're going to take that theory and run with it. So this is, once again, the reference to change they can't believe in. What motivated the Trump wing of the Republican Party, or conservatives, if you will? Like the Tea Party, Trump sympathizers were most concerned with existential threat, right? This continuing issue with immigration, right? But notice when Trump gets upset about immigration, he's not upset about Canadians coming here. He's not upset about Europeans coming here. He's upset about folks coming from countries where folks are like my shade of brown and darker. We argue that this threat is demographic anxiety and not economic anxiety. The Tea Partiers were not motivated by Romney, but they did not go away, nor did they lose their sense of cultural threat. It just festered for 4 more years. Trump effectively communicated and legitimized his sense of demographic anxiety above all else. The belief, once again, that real American culture is under siege. So here's the conventional wisdom: economic anxiety. Economic anxiety, even when it comes to Democrats. And in Q&A, if you guys want to go to talk about the Democratic Party, I have opinions on that too. So what motivated the Trump wing? Oh, this is my favorite part. This is going to take a minute to get through. Now, let me say this. Now, I'm not blaming my dear co-author, Matt, but Matt put this together, right? So here you go. Look at this. Oh, white homeland. Can you guys see that up here? Right there? Okay. Oh, I got another one. There we go. Yeah. Good old Trump with the stars and bars. Yep. All right. This is really good right here. Watch this. Trump calls me American. What motivated the Trump wing? And we have more, right? Now we get to the immigration part. Here. Was this save our country, close our borders, defeat amnesty, Mex, get the hell out of my country? Not done. Every real Muslim is a jihadist. I won't say that. Yeah, support and defend our troops from Islamic savages, keep refugees out, all Muslims are terrorists, deport them all. One more. Black lives don't matter, and neither do your votes. Make America white again. Build the wall, deport them all. Mexico will pay. Oh yeah, here we go. I won't even say that, but look at this. Look at this right here. Look at all this stuff right here. Yeah. And that's essentially what we find empirically. Oh, I forgot about this. Trump nation, whites only. Here's our modeling approach. So let me tell you guys something. So once again, we're social. And so we use a lot of statistics, right? It's not like these are like opinions. This is not, our argument is not based on conjecture. This is actual evidence. And so they're going to be, it might get a little too statistic-y here, but what I will try to do, never fear, Professor Parker's here, I will break it down for you. Okay, first we're going to look at predictive support, right? And then we're going to look at models of political participation and engagement. Then after that, we're going to do additional analyses that are not presented here, but if you guys have any questions about them, I'll be happy to discuss them with you. Yes, they are quite different from mainstream Republicans and conservatives. Trust me on this. I'll explain that to you. So this is how we model cultural threats. So there are some questions on the American National Election Study that, we try to get at the sense of cultural threat we're talking about. So this is the question wording, right? This is the beginning of the question. Some people say that the following things are important for being truly American. Others say that they are not important. How important do you think the following is for being truly American? Now I'm going to ask you guys these questions, right? I'm going to point to you guys. And if you agree with them, please say yeah. To have been born in the United States. How many say yeah? How many say no? Okay, no, okay. Okay, I guess this is Gainesville. Okay, all right. This is about true American identity. Okay, to have American ancestry. No, okay. Okay, to be able to speak English. Okay. To follow America's customs and traditions. How many say yeah? How many say no? Okay, it's about half and half, This is good. I like this. Boy, oh man, this is good. All right. So, and this is another, this is the last one. So then we have, our country would be great if we honor the ways of our forefathers, do what the authorities tell us to do, and get rid of the rotten apples who are ruining everything. What do you guys think about that? No? All right. And then we have what's called a Tea Party feeling thermometer. And basically, what a feeling thermometer is, it measures affect, right? Whether or not you like or dislike what's called an attitude object, right? A person, place, or thing. The Schoolhouse Rock, a noun is a person, place, or thing, right? You guys remember that? I know you millennials don't. So anyway. So what it does is you ask, how do you feel about, in this particular case, the Tea Party, right? Because we think the Tea Party has something to do, it can help measure how people feel about Trump ultimately. So, and it's from 1 to 100. And so if you are like a 99, you really love whatever the object is. If you're around 1, you really don't like it. Okay. And so we got the honor our forefathers thing. So it gets a little tricky here, right? But I'll break this down for you guys. So this is what the model is, right? So we have all these variables, right, that are trying to predict support for Trump, right? That's what we're trying to predict. And so we have all these things that we believe that inform or influence, support for Trump. And this is only for whites, right? So we got the Tea Party feeling thermometer, the True American Index, honor our forefathers, ideology, which is if you're liberal or conservative, whether or not, and then party ID, whether or not you are a Democrat, Republican, or an independent. And these are the key ones right here. The first three, and then whether or not you're worried about the economy, right? That's the economic anxiety item, right? And this is what we find. So if you feel really warm towards the Tea Party, it increases the probability by 24% that you support Trump. If you believe in that index I asked you about whether or not these attributes are really American, if you agree with those, it increases the probability by 8% that you support Trump. Honor our forefathers, 10.5, increases the probability by 10.5 percentage points. Ideology, if you're conservative, Matt didn't put these here, but I'll eyeball this, about 35 percentage points. If you are a Republican, it increases the probability you support Trump by about 7 percentage points. Worried about the economy, it has no effect. And let me tell you why it has no effect. So when you see this line, this axis right here, any one of these bars that cross this line here, that means it's equal to 0, right? So that means it has 0 effect. So I'm just going to run through these. Desire for small government, right? Nothing, right? No effect. You pay attention to politics, it increases the probability by 13%. Moral traditionalism, right, increases by 10%. Let me just march through these. Racism increases support for Trump by 17%. Authoritarianism, nothing. Anti-egalitarianism, about 10%. Sexism increases the probability you support Trump by about 15%. Ethnocentrism, meaning that there's a sense of in-group love, right? It's not necessarily racism, but it's a sense that you love whatever your group is. It increases the probability. This is only among white folks. Increases the probability by 24%. And then we just march through this. The older you get, the less likely you are. No, that's wrong. More likely you are to support Trump. But this is coded in a different direction. We don't really have to run through all these. These are less important, right? Born again Christian, nothing. Income, nothing. Church attendance, nothing. So these are the predictors of support for Trump, right? The whole economic anxiety thing right here, worried about the economy, right? Nothing, right? Racism scores big, and these other items up here score big as well. And this is what Matt and I hypothesize, right, is going to do most of the heavy lifting. So, yeah, look at this. Conventional wisdom, small government, and worried about the economy, right? Nothing. Okay. Now, this is for people of color, right? What we did was we have this survey called the CMPS in which we surveyed people of color, right? For Black, Latino, Asians, and Muslim communities, does a Trump effect elicit an equal and opposite effect? And this is dynamic I was telling you guys about, right? The first book, we just looked at whites. This book, we're looking at the dynamic, and I have to credit Matt for that because Matt really insisted on that. So this is what we do. Trump and his movement represent a material and symbolic threat to people of color. So it's different theoretically, you guys, from what we hypothesize that Trump elicits from whites. From people of color, it's a symbolic threat. If we think about, let's say, black people, right, and this threat to, when Trump had this commission initially, right, to look at the vote, to re-examine the vote. And you guys know, for black people, we fought and died for the right to vote, right? So it not only has a effect in a sense that it permits us to have our voices heard, but it's also very important symbolically. Same thing for Latinos when it comes to the issue of immigration, right? Immigration symbolically, because it kind of tells them, it kind of gives them a sense of, if they want undocumented, I refuse to call them illegal immigrants, right? Most of us in academia refuse to use that term. We prefer the term undocumented. So what happens is it gives them a sense of whether or not they feel wanted, right, in this country. This country is a nation of immigrants, right? So it has a very symbolic effect, but it also has a very material effect as well, potentially, because what if one of the breadwinners in your house gets deported, right? So it has a very material effect as well. Okay. Even after controlling for all these other things, partisanship, ideology, racial, expect to perceive racism to be associated with stronger Trump opposition, and that's precisely what we find. So blacks face discrimination, Latinos face discrimination, minorities need to adapt. These are all predictors of opposition to Trump, right? Partisanship, it's a really strong predictor. So if you're a Democrat, it increases the probability that you will reject Trump or not support Trump by 45 percentage points, right? And let's continue with this. So this was the ANES. This is the data set I was telling you about. Racism is a major problem. Experience discrimination. Society doesn't respect people of color. All predictors of opposition to Trump. And all the rest of these. So let me see. Yeah, here. Ideology is a really strong predictor. Whether or not one is a liberal predicts opposition to Trump. Party ID projects opposition to Trump. And this is really interesting right here, you guys. Check this one out. So what we did here is, in this screen, what we're doing is we're looking at these predicted probabilities broken down by race, right? So instead of looking at this one, when we lump all the races together, this one, we separate them all out. So if we look at this, so we say, okay, so these are minimum and maximum values. The bottom line is, if you look at this chart, this is going to be too difficult to interpret. This is a whole lot easier here. So if you look at the slopes and intercepts, so the top slope is for black people, right? So that slope is significant, but it's not as steep as a slope for Asian Americans, right? So what this says is we combined all these racism items, right? And we said, okay, we're going to separate these out by race and look at the predicted probabilities. And all of these slopes, all of these effects are highly significant, right? And the steeper the slope, the more meaningful the effect, right? And it's really steep and significant for all of them. But what this says is, right here, if we look at this axis right here, the y-axis, right? So black folks start off a lot more opposed to Trump than any other racial group, right? And so right here we got the minimum feeling of racism, the maximum feeling of racism right here. So blacks already start off pretty high, and they still get higher, but look, Latinos start off lower, and Asian Americans start off even lower than that. But as we work across this sense of racism, look at the slopes here, right? It increases dramatically. So what that says is the more color, feel like they're not welcome in this country, the more people feel a sense of racism, the more likely they are going to oppose Trump. Now, we're going to look at political participation. Okay, so now we're just at, how people feel about Trump. Now we're going to take a look at the extent to which Trump motivates this sense of political participation for Trump supporters and people of color who reject Trump. Threat can be mobilizing. We know that. All this stuff. Let's get to the results. So look at these. So we have all these different modes of political participation. Everything from whether or not you voted to whether or not you donated money, all the way down to whether or not you boycotted a company. Now, once again, if we look at these lines here, these little gray lines in the middle here, like as long as they're on the right side of the y-axis here, that means that they tell us something important, right? And so if we look at this, Trump really motivates Trump supporters to get out across almost all these domains of political participation, right? Almost all of them, even all the way up to and including boycott of the company. Now, for people of color, he does essentially the same thing, right? So he's motivating people, white people who are Trump supporters, and he's also motivating people of color to get out as well who oppose Trump. Now, if we really want to look at this in a more graphic form, what this tells us, so we're looking at the Trump feeling thermometer here, right? So right here in this column on the y-axis is the probability of getting out and voting, right? Participating in politics, because what we did was we combined all of those items of political participation into one, right? We compressed them all into one sort of composite measure, and then we just looked at this in a more general way. And so what we see is, so the warmer white people are on Trump feeling thermometer, the more likely they are to engage in politics. The warmer people of color are on the Trump feeling thermometer, the less likely they are to participate in politics. So let me sum this up here right now. So blacks, Latinos, and Asians who are highly unfavorable toward Trump were more likely to report a linked fate with other minorities, oppose racial profiling, believe immigrants contribute to America, support Black Lives Matter, and desire to work with other minorities. Blacks and Latinos and Asians who are highly unfavorable toward Trump were also more likely to support Black support for Latino representatives, Latino support for Black representatives, Asian belief that Obama was hope for Asians, Black belief that immigrants enrich America, and Latino link fate with Blacks. Implications and next steps. How do we arrive at this point? Tea Party, Obama, immigration, existential threat. How long will this last? We never believed the Tea Party was a short-term phenomena, and once again, we think this will continue through 2020 and beyond. And experiments and what are called qualitative research needed to further isolate the mechanisms and the causality. Now, we just presented the quantitative stuff, but we also have focus group stuff that allow us to really get directly at this, measuring this sense of existential threat, right? So Matt ran the whole focus group operation, and so he had, all across the country, he had groups of whites and people of color, and so for the most part, you had white folks who were Trump supporters were mainly talking about this sense of, America's changing too fast. We feel nervous, we feel anxious, right? For people of color, it was this sense that Trump was a racist, right? And America was going backwards in time, right? So going backwards in time means something clearly different for whites who are Trump supporters and people of color. Going backwards in time for whites who are Trump supporters, that's a good thing. For people of color, not a good thing. Okay, that's it. Thank you for your time and your patience.
Who wants to ask the first question? Come.
Just a couple of days ago, I read an analysis that said that about 80% of evangelicals voted for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to understand that in your data. This is the same group which by and large also supposedly voted for Obama twice.
Mm-hmm.
So this is quite a change. How do you explain that?
So that's a really good question. And so what I want to show you is, this is people of color. Let's get to whites here. Let's see what happens here. So in Christian evangelicals, right? If you look at this empirically, nothing. So, and let me tell you why, like you hear, like, okay, so they voted for him, no question about that. But when you put this in a model empirically, right, and you test these, what happens is you have to account for all these other factors in this model, right? And so what happens is that because we include some of these other things, like racism, moral traditionalism, even these things, and I would imagine, the True American Index and Honor Our Forefathers, these things are highly correlated with evangelicalism, right? That means to say that they're really highly and tightly related. So when you put these in a model, that reduces that to nothing, right? So what happens is what you guys will often see on CNN, Fox, whatever you guys watch, you will generally see what are called cross-tabulations, what are called descriptive statistics, right? And they're descriptive because they have no theory behind them, right? And all they're doing is they're making these really simple, like one-on-one relationships, right? But when you start adding these other factors in that are actually more realistic, right? You have to take into account these other things, right? So let me give you an example. So if we're looking at the relationship between evangelicalism and support for Trump or voting for Trump, right? So as social scientists, we have to say, what are some of the other factors that might be a part of this relationship, right? Because if we want to really understand how these things are working together, we have to understand how these other things might impact this relationship between evangelicalism and support for Trump. And that's what this essentially is, right? And once you account for these other factors, right, that might be a part of this relationship between support for Trump and evangelicals, the relationship between evangelicals completely drops out, right? So what you guys are getting when you guys are watching whatever news you're watching or consuming, you guys are getting a very, very simple, stylized presentation of the data. So it really ultimately has no impact.
So to take current headlines with the potential budding trade war, clearly China is targeting Trump voters with their tariffs. But if it's not economic anxiety, is that going to have any effect?
So, okay, that's a really good question. So it depends on the level of analysis at which we're working. So we're working with here like individual levels and the individual level of analysis, right? If we're looking at a more macroeconomic level, I've read some papers that show that in areas that were hit hardest by trade, right, then you have increased support for Trump, right? I do believe that, right? So we're talking about differences in levels of analysis, right? And so we're talking about mainly when I'm talking about differences in levels of analysis, I'm talking about at the more aggregate level, right? And that could have that could show a difference or indicate a difference at the aggregate level and the individual level. You could have different results, right? But so what Matt and I are survey researchers, right? So we mainly stick with the individual analysis. But what I'm saying is what you're suggesting, that could very well be true. Because I've read some of those papers that empirically that actually show that. The places that higher trade, the outsourcing and trade and balances of trade affect most, they were definitely more supportive of Trump and also more authoritarian, if you will.
But my question is, will their support for Trump change?
No, it won't. I won't. Look, what's today? Today is April 5th. I'm telling you right now, it won't, right? Let me tell you why it won't. Because, and I'll say this, so the guy here, relationship between evangelicals and support for Trump. So let's just say I strip this all away, right? And say that, okay, so let's say that in some counterfactual, that relationship actually holds once you model it. So then what I'll say, maybe perhaps these people who are evangelicals and support Trump, given all his travails, right? It could be the fact that maybe they're single issue voters, right? Maybe they just wanted maybe they wanted a Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. Maybe that's why they supported Trump, right? So it could be a single issue thing, right? But to answer, you guys aren't telling me your names at all, so I don't know what to call you. But to the gentleman in the striped shirt, so I will say that they will remain behind Trump because Trump is the last thing between them and the America that they fear, right? The last thing. He's guarding the ramparts. He's the sentry on watch, even though he got out of the draft some kind of way. I don't know why I use that analog, but yeah. So they stick with him from hell or high water, right? Because of what he symbolizes, right? So one would think that, they should start abandoning him, but they're not. They're not. And look, if I'm wrong, you guys know where I am. You guys, my email address, csparker@uw.edu or Twitter @BlackBruin, right? If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong, right? But I know I'm not.
So, taking into account this information that you've presented today, I'd like to ask what you think the implications are for the future of the Democratic Party in the United States, and expanding on that, right, you alluded to it earlier, the implications for the movement on the left in general in the United States.
Okay, Austin, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not that old. Okay, I still remember names. All right, so Democratic Party is a mess. It is an unmitigated mess because you have at least a couple factions, right? You have the Bernie faction, which is all about class, right? And then you have a more identity politics faction, right? That's about race and gender. And until they figure that out, Bozo's going to win again. I don't know if you guys know who Bozo the Clown is, but I guess Bozo Captain Kangaroo just died, right? Anyway, all right. So, this guy, your president, I refuse to call him my president. He's number 45 as far as I'm concerned. He's going to win again because the Democrats are divided. Who are they going to run, right? What's going to be the platform, right? It's a real mess right now to figure out where they're going to go. And it's going to be really hard to get these two wings of the party to come together, right? The more radical wing of the party who wants to get younger, right, and who wants to go maybe in some in a little more of an identity direction. And then you have folks who are a little older, so if you think about Elizabeth Warren, right, she's more in the Bernie kind of camp, but it's not clear she's going to run. It's not clear Bernie's going to run, really. And I don't know if you guys saw what he did or said allegedly yesterday. There was something in the newspapers in which he sort of made some veiled jabs at Obama, basically saying that the Democratic Party, has lost a ton of unprecedented number of legislative seats over the last 15 years, which is true, right? That is very, very true. And I do have an explanation for that. I do think that the fact that Obama got elected, for a minute, it seemed like there was this sort of kumbaya moment when it came to race, right? Didn't last too long, but yeah, I thought a lot of people thought that we were over race, and clearly we weren't. And the data suggests that race relations are even worse since Obama got elected, right? The bottom line is, if we don't have Bush, we don't get Obama. We don't have Obama, we don't get Trump, right? These are all massive course corrections. But to answer your question, I think that the Democrats, they need to figure out what direction they want to go in, right? Do they want to go in a younger, more radical direction, or do they want to stay more in the middle, right, where like the Clinton camp was, right? The whole Clinton strategy was about triangulation, right? Think about what Clinton did. Clinton was not a reformer, right? Clinton didn't really run to the left at all. He was not progressive at all, right? Obama, if we really think about it, didn't govern as a progressive, right? Let's keep this 100% real. He did not, right? So the Democratic Party is in a lot of trouble right now. One of the things the Democrats need to do, they need to get more backbone. They need to get some backbone. You think about what Republicans have been able to do. Republicans on the regular just all the time, all the time, right? And let me tell you why Republicans are so good at that. Republicans generally run on negative affect. That is to say, fear, anger, and anxiety, right? That's what gets people out. It hits them in the gut. Democrats, they want to think about what about this policy? What about that policy? It's like herding cats, right? You can't get them all moving the same direction, right? One of the things that Republicans do, what I really respect, they have their little fight. Then at the end of the day, they line up and they march, right? You have to respect that, even if you don't agree with the politics. Yes.
Hello, my name's Oni. My question for you, talk a little bit about how the right and the Republican Party are really great at organizing. And I think one of the reasons for that is they don't care about intersectionality. Like, they just don't care about those types of things. I think that's why it's so hard to mobilize the left. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on just really addressing people of color that are on the fence and mobilizing that area of people? You do mention Asian Americans have a lot of apolitical leanings. I'm Filipino American, and I have several family members that have voted for Trump, don't really want to get involved in politics. So I was just wondering, how can you see like this coalition work just manifesting in the next couple of years? Because like you said, like, we can't be out organized by these people. And I think white supremacist groups are so well organized because they just feed on fear. So like, what can our like counter strategy be?
So that's a good question. Thank you. So this is what I think. So if you look at the data that I just presented, I kind of went through it kind of fast because I wanted to get to Q&A, and if any of you want to go back to it, I'm more than happy to do so. But what we show, one of the arguments that our central argument when it comes to people of color, that we show that when people of color feel this sense of existential threat that is both symbolic and material, they mobilize because they feel like they have something to lose, right? And so here's another example. So in the second time Obama ran in 2012, right, the turnout for him nationally I'm just talking about blacks, was I think around about 67%, right? The highest it had ever been prior to that was 2008, where it was like 64, 65%. Then prior to that, the largest black turnout was in 1964 when it was about 54%, right? Now think about what was happening in 64 where you had that high watermark. You had Lyndon Johnson running against Barry Goldwater, right? Highly racialized election, right? Black folks felt like they had something to lose, right? With Obama, it was more about something to gain. Now, fast forward to the special election in Alabama last year, right? Doug Jones versus Idiot Moore, whatever that Yahoo's name was, right? This guy, the stuff he said that America was better when there was slavery, he's running around just messing with younger girls. It's just crazy that this guy even got in that position. But think of turnout among black folks, 89%. 89%, right? They voted above and beyond what their representation is and that what their numbers are in Alabama. So what that tells us, black folks were really scared, right? They were upset. They were concerned. So they got out. So what I'm suggesting here is that we showed this in the data. The more people of color were scared, the more they mobilized. And one of the simulations that we run in the book is that if you change the turnout of people of color in 2016 by just 0.78 percentage points, Hillary wins Wisconsin, Ohio, and Michigan. Not even a whole percentage point. If you increase just people of color by 1.5 percentage points, she wins this state. I'm just talking about people of color. I'm not talking about whites, just people of color, right? So the issue is, so what one question would be is, so if people of color, if you show that probabilistically, that, and one of the things I didn't show was the sort of overall probability of turnout for people of color. So the more people of color fear Trump, it increased the probability of them turning out by 64 percentage points. Now, so some people would say, well, shoot, well, how come she didn't win? The problem is not enough people of color thought him a threat. That's what the problem was, right? And then beyond that, Hillary, with the super predator thing years ago and coming out with the all lives matter thing, right? It's just, no, right? So they didn't think a threat. They didn't really want to vote for her. Why go out and vote? So to your question, I think people of color need to feel like they have something to lose, like there's a real tangibility of us rolling backwards in time, right, to the 1950s, 1940s, right, where people of color knew our places, or where people who have alternative or different sexual preferences, where they stayed in the closet, right, where women knew their places, right. And what amazes me, now some of you, maybe Southern folks can explain this to me, that Roy Moore had won 53% of college-educated white women in Alabama. Can somebody help me understand this? No, I'm serious. I'm really at sea on this. Somebody help a brother out? Okay. Any other questions?
Hi, my name's Geneva. Just to follow up on what you were saying, how in a previous question you talked about how Republicans run on fear and those kind of scare tactics, but then answering her question with, they weren't scared enough. So how do we...
No, not Republicans, people of color.
Yeah, people of color weren't scared enough, so they didn't turn out.
Yeah.
So how do we move away from that and get people to actually care without adapting Republicans' scare tactics?
Well, first of all, that's a really good question. First of all, we need to get out of this trick bag we're in right now. So I don't care how we get out of it. If it means running on fear or anger and anxiety, let's do that, right? Let's just get out of this trick bag. I want to just get out of this guy's presidency just alive, right? Just, without a nuclear holocaust, right? So first of all, Democrats need to be more pragmatic. And that's one thing Republicans or conservatives are. They're for the most part, they're very pragmatic, right? They're very pragmatic. And fear, anger, and anxiety, that is a very pragmatic way of approaching turnout, right? Democrats want to run on hope and positive affect, hope, pride, and those are great things, but I mean, like right now, it's like not working, right? Think about now, Hillary she changed messages a couple times. Part of it was like, what was it? Together Forward or something like that, which was positive, but she was like really, going after Trump in other ways, right? So the message really wasn't consistent at all. So I like, what do we have to be positive about as people, as progressives? Like, what would a positive message look like, right? So if you want to make it all about class, and see, this is the sticky point when it comes to progressives, right? Bernie's mistake, if you ask me, you guys aren't asking, but I'm going to assume you want to know, is that he reduced everything to class, right? He reduced everything to class. Race was an afterthought, right? And so for people of color, speaking for myself and other people that I know, like, race is our primary identity. We all have multiple identities, right? But race is our primary identity, right? And so, look, I'm a black man. I do pretty well, but people still see me as a black man first, not some black professor, educated and all. They see me as a black man first, right? And I get treated as such, which, as you might imagine, is not all that great all the time, right? So that is the identity with which I'm going to identify primarily, right? Not the class thing, because if it was all about class, then I wouldn't get the treatment that I often get. And dare I say that it happens to a lot of other people of color in the same position. So class is not going to work for us. Think about it like this. Let's think about this historically, right? The populist party, and don't even get me started on that, right? The way that populism is just getting just slanderized these days, because these people, what's happening here, not populism. What's happening in Europe, not populism, right? I got a whole paper on that, right? I can't stand it, right? But for right now, let's think about the party that Williams Jennings Bryan, headed in the late 19th century, right? Now, that was supposed to be a class-based party, right? It was supposed to be farmers, agrarians, right? So you had black folks and you had white folks, poor farmers, regardless of race, right? That was supposed to work, right? Didn't work. Why? Because the Democrats came in, and those were the old Democrats, right? They came in and played the race card, right? Boom, done. Because they actually had a chance to make some noise, the populists did, right? Played the race card, done. Next time, FDR with the New Deal, right? Basically a class-based thing, right? Guess who got written out of the New Deal? Black people. Why? Because we were primarily in the occupations of farmers, right, and domestics. They were not covered under Social Security. So whenever white folks come along talking about this class stuff, we get really, really wary about it. Now, in theory, it should work because race and class are so tightly linked. Because the main reason why people of color are in the class-based positions that we are is because of our race, right? Tightly linked. But when you think about it in reality, theory is one thing, reality is often different. So the way that our lived experiences work is that we primarily operate based on our racial identity. Not to say that we don't ever operate on our class identities, right? But primarily our racial identities, right? But and it's all about context. In the United States, racial identity. Those of us that are people of color, you go to Europe or go someplace else, you're an American, right? United States, you're black or you're Asian or you're Latino or Latinx, I guess is what the currently favorite term is, right? So I think that I just think the class-based thing, in theory, it should work, but I think the race thing is always going to come in there and drive a wedge in it.
Hi there, my name is Paula, and I was wondering on your opinions of whether or not you think the Democratic Party was being a little too progressive by having yet another minority as their main candidate instead of a regular old white dude.
Okay, wow. I'm trying not to take the bait on that one. So I think that another white dude. So if we think about come on, how many shots at this are white guys going to get, right? Come on. Come on. I think the Democrats would have a shot if they ran, a woman of color or just a woman, right? Another person of color, right? I think that might help because it'll energize. First of all, it's going to energize people of color, like if it's another person of color. Second of all, it's going to energize you guys, students, right? Because you guys live in a far more diverse society than those of us like who are my generation and older grew up in, right? So it's going to energize you guys as well, right? And so I think with that, I think running another, old white man, okay, even a young white dude, right? I don't think that that's really going to, I just really don't think that that's going to do it. It's more the same, and it's going to be more like, it's just more the same, right? And I think we're just we are really fractured right now. And I think that we need something to shake things up. And I would ask you guys as students, right? Would you guys want to see another white man? Right? I don't know. My students wouldn't want to see that, right? So I'm assuming you guys wouldn't want to see that either. And people of color, we damn sure don't want to see it again, right? It's just right. So we need somebody that's energized, the left, if you will, right? And another white man is just, I'm sorry, not going to do it, right? I understand going to be too progressive, but they could also be too progressive in a sense of policy positions, right? That's another way of thinking about them being too progressive, right? Of making, now, hey, free college, great, right? They do it in Europe. They've been doing it in Europe for a long time. That would be really, really hard for that to happen here, right? So I think that might be a bridge too far, right? So if you were to make that claim and say, what about free college? I'd say maybe that's a little too progressive, right? But in terms of the demographic profile of a candidate, no, I think the more progressive, the better.
I didn't want to ask a question, but I had one upstairs. I'm Chris. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science.
Oh, my name is Chris, too.
Yeah.
I'm a political scientist,
We're
too.
both Chris. Okay.
All right, go ahead. And we're both black. Yeah, all right.
Yes. So we talked about the failings of the Democrat Party. I've talked a lot about it with some of the cohorts in my department.
Yeah.
But what we fail to acknowledge is the fact that even though you have to win the presidency by electoral college, that Hillary Clinton won a popular vote by the largest margin in any election in American history. So does that point to the Republicans having a better strategy as opposed to a type of indictment on the fear of conservatives and changing ideology in America?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if ideology is changing necessarily. I think you have a split on the right and an increasing split on the left. But I take your question. I mean, that's a structural thing. The electoral college, it was set up that way so all states can have a more or less equal say in the outcome. And so if the argument is that if we got rid of that, would that be, is the argument, so the question you're asking is, would that be a good thing, like normatively or positively, or like? No, it was more so, does it show that? Thank you, Gail.
Does it show that it's just a matter of Republicans having a better strategy for the past election rather than looking at the pitfalls of Hillary or whether or not she was progressive enough or?
Well, okay, but think about it like this. Okay, that's a good question. But think about it like this, though. So, Democrats have won Michigan with some regularity, right? They won Wisconsin with some regularity, right? Even though they have a hardcore, Republican governor, right? So in that case, it was not about the electoral college in the sense that Democrats normally win those states. It's just that you didn't get enough turnout, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just think in this particular case, I just think Hillary just wasn't a great candidate, right? She didn't inspire a whole lot of passion from everybody, right? And so I think if you had a better candidate, if you will, right? Now, people always ask me, what if Bernie ran, right? What if Bernie had got the nomination? And I would say if Bernie got the nomination, I think Democrats still would have lost, and they would have lost by a wider margin because even fewer people of color would have turned out. Are we done? Give me the execution thing. Okay. Okay, I guess we're done, people.
Thank you for coming. I'm sure he will be happy to continue to talk with you, but for C-SPAN, we have to quit.
Okay, yeah, if you guys want to just run up on me and talk to me, that's fine. Dan, don't forget about me.